In the world of video rentals, sex and violence often sells, and there's now concern that some videos may be selling your child a violently distorted future. Movies depicting realistic murders are among the hottest draws for teenagers. And tonight, in part one of our special series, Channel 3's Don Hammond tells us why the scare goes beyond what we see on the TV screen.
There's this one guy who's sitting on a mattress and he's ripping himself apart with a razor.
Usually there's one person that's killing, and they always kill the girls.
The gore. Oh, there's naked women all over the place.
They like to actually show the brains hanging on the floor.
They get chopped with axes and stuff.
And I like people getting cut up. I get into it.
At first you go, ah, but then after you see it and you see the whole movie, you like it. You start to like it.
And what they like are the bloodiest, most explicit and violent movies that have come out in the history of filmmaking. Many combine sex with violence, often depicting mutilation, rape, and murder. But they aren't seeing these movies at the theater. They're renting them from the horror section of your local video store.
The violence that is in there is things being done to women and on women. They're being hung up, they're being dismembered, they're being cut with surgical tools, they're being shot in the face, point blank with a gun. And all of this type of stuff is being presented as acceptable.
With repeated exposure to the slasher films, I think what we're seeing is a callousness, a kind of desensitization to female victims of violence in particular.
Give it to her, you know, and slap her, shoot her, kill her, tear her apart.
They know it's entertainment, they know it's special effects, they get together, they have little parties, they watch these movies, they have a good time. I don't think they're really seeing the undercurrents that a lot of paranoid parents are seeing.
Chaz Ballin has talked to hundreds of teenagers about horror films. He's written books on the subject and serves as the splatter critic for 2 horror magazines.
I don't think they have to show the naked girl, but they do. They they put sex and violence together a lot.
But it's cool. it's fun. It's crazy.
It's maybe their first exposure to sex. It is a slasher film in which sex is paired with the most gruesome and graphic forms of violence, so that the one begins to evoke the other in the young child's mind. That's a cause for concern.
Strong concern for Dan Linz, who's a noted authority on the effects of sex and violence in the mass media. As a psychologist and professor at UC Santa Barbara, Linz has conducted studies which expose male college students to slasher films, movies that depict women being brutalized in the worst ways, movies that are the most popular with kids today.
People that originally perceived a lot of violence in the material see less violence with repeated exposure. The material that was originally deemed to be offensive, degrading to women, less so with repeated exposure. But even more importantly, when we put them in a new situation now, when they're asked to make an evaluation of, let's say, a rape victim at trial, and we actually show people videotape reenactments of a rape trial, have them evaluate the victim, we find that she is judged as less injured, a little less sympathy for her, if the young men have been exposed to slasher films.
The movie that you can barely make out behind me is not a slasher film. However, it is so violent and graphic that we just can't show it on TV. It's also one of 2 movies chosen by a group of very nice teenagers who allowed us to come watch them watch movies. Here's how they reacted to Hellbound to Hellraiser 2.
Oh, that was bad.
Throughout this movie, they'll see faces ripped apart with hooks, a man slashing himself into a bloody pulp, and graphic, macabre, torturous images that defy description. But as the movie wears on, the shock value wears off. They've become desensitized to the violence, and though the movie still evokes grimaces, the movie no longer seems quite so grim.
They're seeing it as entertainment, and I don't think they're becoming sexually twisted or particularly malevolent or particularly misogynistic from watching these films. They can separate the fact from the fiction.
The real question is, are we as a society willing to conduct the social experiment whereby we allow child after child after child to be exposed to these kinds of depictions, waiting to see if there is this kind of callousness that I'm talking about, or are we willing at this point to take a step to intervene?
In Sacramento, Don Hammond, Channel 3 reports.
If these tapes are so violent and so explicit, why is it so easy for teenagers to get a hold of them? Well, we'll have some answers to that question in part 2 of our special series, Violent Tapes, when Channel 3 reports tonight.